From beach towels to tea towels, and from mugs to water bottles, the TNT shop has it all. Browse our shop now at tntradio.live. Cutting through the clutter, this is the Misty Winston Show on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Well, hey there, and welcome to the Misty Winston Show right here on today's News Talk. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and hanging out with me today. Big hello to my friends in the chat. Thanks for being here. It's always good to see you. If you are listening to us live, there is a chat available both on the website, tntradio.live, and on the app, which is available both on the Apple App Store and as well on Google Play. Okay, Adam has today off again, so no news segment with him. However, I do have several stories I wanted to go through with you. First of all, the Burning Man thing makes me laugh. I shouldn't laugh. It's, chaos out there, but it is kind of funny. It's like the biggest hipster liberal fest I've ever seen in my entire life. They had this whole art installation where, I don't know, some big thing caught on fire, and then there was like this memorial to Ukrainian bravery or whatever. It's so silly. And I've always mocked the whole idea and the whole festival. And so this whole thing just kind of makes me giggle a little bit. Okay. Now, I want to talk about Steve Harwell, which if you're not aware, he's the lead singer for the band Smash Mouth. He has sadly passed away at the age of just 56. It's terribly sad. He's been dealing with alcoholism and addiction for many years. He famously showed up to perform a couple years ago, completely wasted. He couldn't remember the words to his own songs. He ended up throwing up a Nazi salute and threatening a fan, saying he would kill his whole family. I'm bringing this up not because, I'm a big fan of Steve Harwell. I mean, the band Smash Mouth. Hey, now you're an all-star. Fine, whatever. I bring it up because I'm seeing something really troubling that's happening. Every time somebody dies, I think that a lot of people who are COVID critical and vaccine skeptics, of which I am myself, but I see a lot of these people, they want to immediately point the finger to the jab. And I think that that's really dangerous. I think it's fine. And actually, I think it's vital to ask questions when it makes sense. When, a 30-year-old basketball player who's in top physical condition drops dead of a heart attack. Obviously, I think that there's some reasons to be asking questions there. And I think that that's fine. But when you start pointing at every single death and every single case and make it about the injection, I fear that you start to lose credibility. If somebody gets hit by a bus, it's not the jab. If a troubled rock star with a history of alcohol abuse who has been incredibly unwell for many years and who was just recently hospitalized and then sent into hospice with liver failure, it's probably not the jab. I mean, it just reminds me so much of the COVIDians who wanted to make every single death during COVID a cause, having been caused by COVID. And I would hate to see the skeptics lose their ability to be rational and lose any and all credibility on this issue. Don't start fires just so you can put them out. It's self-defeating. This guy, I mean, again, long history of alcoholism, long history of being incredibly unwell. So, I think just be careful of, be skeptical, but also be logical. I mean, this guy, died of liver failure. I think that's pretty clear. Let's move on. I want to talk about a little bit of Assange news. First, in a recent interview with Randy Credico, journalist, whistleblower, and former ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, said the following. This is regarding the potential for a plea deal, which we have discussed on the show numerous times, and our skepticism about it. So he said, quote, there have been noises made by the U.S. ambassador to Australia saying that a plea deal is possible, and that's what the Australian government has been pushing for as a way to solve it. What I can tell you is there have been no official approaches from the American government indicating any willingness to soften or ameliorate their position. The position of the Biden administration still seems to be that they wish to persecute and destroy Julian and lock him up for life for publishing the truth about war crimes and for publishing. We should never forget Julian is the publisher. Julian is not a whistleblower. That's very important, people. So tired of that. Back to Craig. The whistleblower was Chelsea Manning. Julian is just a publisher, just as the Guardian and the New York Times and the Washington Post were publishers of the same information. So there's no evidence of any sincerity on behalf of the U.S. government in these noises we've been hearing. It seems to be to placate public opinion in Australia, which is over 80% in favor of dropping the charges and allowing Julian to come home to his native country. The American ambassador has made comments about, a plea deal might be possible for this is just rubbish. This is just talk in the air. There's been no kind of approach or indication from the Justice Department or anything like that at all. It's just not true. It's a false statement in order to placate public opinion in Australia, end quote. So yes, that is from Craig Murray. That's what we discussed here, that we thought that it was very likely a bunch of garbage, that it was just her kind of throwing things out into the air to, make people complacent, to kind of put that hope out into the air, and maybe just push people into being cool with things for now. I think the United States is desperate to keep this chill until after the election. And I think that this whole plea deal nonsense is just another part of that. So yes, on Craig Murray, I think I agree with him 100%. I think that is all just, and I think it's also meant to kind of squash the noise that Assange supporters around the globe have been putting up. It's gotten very loud. I think that they're feeling that pressure. As he mentioned in that statement, as we've talked about here numerous times, I think in some polling in Australia, 88% of the Australian public agree. Getting people to agree, 88% of people to agree on literally anything is insane. That's crazy. So the public support for Julian Assange in Australia is immense. And I think that the Australian government is feeling that. I think by proxy, the United States government is feeling that. And so I think that those statements made by Caroline Kennedy were likely just, a little bit of a little nudge and a nod to try to get people to just chill out on it. So don't chill out. Be louder. That's my advice to you. Okay, so don't forget, you can follow me over on the tweeters at Sarcasm Stardust. Check out the Substack, mistywinston.substack.com. There is a write-up for the guest of the day every day, so you can find, follow, and support their work as well. And shoot me an email, mistywinston@tntradio.live. I will try to get back to you on what a lot of you emailed me about the Dr. Shiva interview. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate all of that. That was very nice. If you missed your favorite TNT radio show or interview, you can listen back whenever you want, wherever you want. I get this question all the time. Visit the episodes tab on the TNT Radio website, which again is tntradio.live. And then we're also on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, Podbean, iHeart, and TuneIn. So now there's no reason to miss out on anything right here on TNT Radio.
Keeping the commitment 24/7.
I've been in the car all day and I got to listen. Can't get enough of it. You guys are doing a great job.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, I'm very excited. Our guest today is incredible journalist and all-around badass, Vanessa Beeley. Vanessa has done incredible on-the-ground work in the Middle East, including in Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Palestine. You can check her out on Twitter, but I would suggest Telegram because Twitter sucks. Check her out on Telegram. You can also find her website, thewallwillfall.org, and read her Substack, beeley.substack.com. And please support her invaluable work over on Patreon. And as always, you can find links to all of that stuff over on my Substack, mistywinston.substack.com. Vanessa, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, hi, Misty. It's nice to talk to you again.
It's all
at 1:15 a.m.
I know. Thank you for staying up late. I always appreciate that. I know that's rough. I am old and tired, and so I get it. I'm if I have to stay up past midnight, I'm like, really? It's really hard for me. So I get it.
Yeah. No, I know. I kind of normally try to get a bit of sleep, and then didn't manage it tonight. The dogs were going crazy over something. No, it's no problem.
Okay, so if it's okay, I would like to start. You have a piece out today on your Substack that highlights once again Western hypocrisy, which is always fun to talk about. This time in regards to the hand-wringing and pearl clutching that so many have been doing in regards to Russia's treatment of children, including claims of kidnapping and all of that stuff in the conflict with Ukraine. But as your piece points out, the West really has no room to point fingers on this issue, and it is fascinating to me that they think that they do, and that people are throwing these claims around like this with a complete lack of self-awareness. So talk about your piece a little bit and why the West has no room to talk here.
Well, I mean, it is pretty extraordinary. I've been following what's going on in the Northeast with basically EU, US, and British nationals, including child nationals, many of them under the age of 5. Young boys around the age of 12, etc. There's more than 60 British children being held in the ISIS detention camps in northeast Syria. Britain has effectively had a policy of, if you have problematic citizens, just make them former citizens. This was even admitted by a former MI6 operative. And, very clearly that's what they've been doing. So they're condemning basically British national children and EU national children to a life of incarceration where there is high risk of child trafficking, child rape, child abuse, child exploitation, All manner, even the squalid conditions that they live in can be determined as torture by various human rights groups. I always hesitate to use groups like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, but in some cases it's kind of unavoidable because there is such an accountability vacuum in the US occupied territory of northeast Syria that without these Western aligned organizations, you're simply not going to get any information whatsoever out of the area, right? And there are massive human rights abuses going on against children in the areas that are occupied by US military, by their proxy Kurdish Contras, and of course by their oil contractors, their private security contractors that are on the ground in northeast Syria and in southeast Syria. And of course, those are not counted when the UN is presenting you with the military numbers of US personnel inside Syria. They don't count the contractors. They don't count the kind of DynCorp equivalents or DynCorp themselves. And so while the West, through the ICC, which is effectively an instrument for power of the West. I mean, until Putin was basically effectively, I won't say held to account because I don't believe any of the evidence that is being levied against Russia and against President Putin regarding the treatment of children. We'll come back to that in a minute. But basically, Putin is the first white guy that has been prosecuted by the ICC, right? Yeah. So this is a racist, imperialist instrument of power. Nothing more, nothing less. And of course, it's now going after Putin. It was one of the reasons that he didn't attend the BRICS meeting in South Africa because of the threat, not by the incumbent government, but by the problems that the incumbent government would have if Putin came to South Africa. In other words, they would be put under tremendous pressure by the opposition in South Africa and so on, and by the West, at a time that Africa is pivoting east, and we're seeing multiple military coups against Western compliant governments and dictatorships, right, that have been bleeding the country dry on behalf of their colonial masters for decades. And so for me, the hypocrisy is just quite incredible. I mean, just to give one example, people will have heard the name of Shamima Begum. Now, she was trafficked by Canadian intelligence agencies. At least that's the cover story that was put out. In my view, that was put out to basically provide cover for MI6, because MI6, well, they knew exactly what was going on. And Shamima Begum is not the only ISIS bride under the age of 16 that has been trafficked out of Britain into Syria to be sexually abused and violently treated by the various, many of them have multiple sexual abuse relationships. They're passed from fighter to fighter. They're there basically to produce kids for the ISIS fighters. Those kids are now in the detention camps. But Begum has basically been stripped of her British citizenship. At the same time that she was stripped of her British citizenship, I always get this name mixed up, Sajid Javid, who was then in charge, was basically Home Secretary, was giving amnesty of 28 days to British fighters with Al-Qaeda in the Northwest. And yet Samantha Begum, Shamima Begum, sorry, it's 1:15, guys. Shamima Begum, who was trafficked with the full knowledge of British authorities to Syria, aged 15, right? And who now has kids. The baby that she was pregnant with when she was appealing against that ruling died in Syria because of lack of medical care in the camps and in the areas where she's being held, has been stripped of her citizenship. Now, in my opinion, why has that happened? Is because they don't want her coming back. They don't want her put on trial, because if she's put on trial, she's going to present an awful lot of evidence, right, that is going to shock the MI6 and expose their operations trafficking child brides to Syria for ISIS terrorists when they're claiming to fight ISIS inside Syria. So, the hypocrisy here is so multi-layered and complex that it's kind of difficult to escape from it. And then they have the kind of, I don't know what you call it, the nerve to point the finger at Russia for allegedly abducting children from a war zone that they created since 2014, when the Kiev regime and its Nazi battalion started the ethnic cleansing program of Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine.
Yes.
And since the special military operation, yes, Russia has been enabling the evacuation of children and their families and orphans from the area of Donbass that is daily under barrage of missiles, US and NATO supplied missiles, cluster bombs, petal mines, etc., into their towns and civilian areas, right? And I've been to the refugee centers in Eastern
Yes, I want to talk to you about that. We have to take a quick break, but I want to talk to you about, because you did visit these refugee centers that are in Russia. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I feel like nobody's really talking about this aspect of it. And obviously in war, I think the most vulnerable, the most affected negatively are obviously going to be children. And I think that it's really unfortunate that this conversation isn't being had more. And you're right, the Western hypocrisy here, it's astounding, because it's not just, as you talked about, the people, the kids that are in camps in Syria, it's all over the globe. I mean, how many kids have we killed in Yemen? I mean, look at our own border in the United States. How many kids have we ripped apart from their parents? How many kids are being kept in cages? How many kids are being sexually assaulted and molested in those camps at the border? And so the idea that we want to wag our finger at Vladimir Putin over this is just ridiculous. So let's take a quick break. We're going to be right back with more from Vanessa right after this on TNT Radio.
TNT Radio's Jeremy Nell and Germ Warfare.
Your work is on fire at the moment. You are covering a whole range of threads within the matrix.
I mean, the main thing that we're doing is we're really exposing that, that government was never intended to protect life, liberty, and property. Government is best thought of as a technique to rob and control populations, and using a monopolized media to control the information that the population receives, so that they never understand that you don't really need government, that everything that government does would be done better, faster, cheaper by the free market or by mutual aid societies or by nonprofits or co-ops or insurance companies or genuine charities. We just really don't need government. But that's something that not only are you never going to hear, but the media is weaving this belief in government into, not just the news, but in fiction. They're, here in the United States, they're making the government the hero. They're, product placing the American flag in moments of high positive emotion.
Jeremy Nell on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
The World Alliance of Independence Thinkers is a 21st century think tank and advocate for civil rights and small and medium-sized enterprises. WAIT was founded upon the realization that our liberal Western way of life and the freedoms that come with it are under serious threat from an enemy from within. Citizens have become subservient to a technocratic form of government that organizes itself under the structures of the United Nations, away from national sovereignty towards stakeholder capitalism. To prevent further loss of fundamental rights, WAIT introduces a unique call to action to strengthen humanity's position under international law and regain a democratic place at the table. For sovereignty, democracy, and the pursuit of meaning, visit wait-org.com to find out how you can become a member and help them achieve their goals. A message brought to you by TNT Radio.
The conversation continues.
I don't believe it, and I think that's a terrible position that I am in, that I don't trust my government.
This is today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we are here joined by Vanessa Beeley. We're talking about the ridiculous Western hypocrisy on the finger wagging we've been doing at Vladimir Putin over Ukrainian children that has been kidnapped, apparently, from incredibly dangerous areas in the Donbass, where they're, as Vanessa said, they're under complete barrage constantly, and so they have been taken from that situation and put into safety. And you've actually visited these refugee camps. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, basically when I went, I think it was November 2022, when I went to cover the referendum in the Donbass region to reunify with Russia, because of course this used to be part of Russia. So for these people, they never considered themselves separated from Russia. Anyway, that's another important point to make. But we visited, I think, 3 or 4 of the biggest refugee centers in Eastern Russia. And here they had accepted families from, particularly from Mariupol, because I think at that time the battles for Mariupol were ongoing. And I mean, I was having seen how, for example, Syrian, Afghani, Pakistani refugees are treated in Europe. I mean, I'd visited previously refugee centers on Lesbos, in island in Greece, for example, where a facility that was supposed to house maximum 3,000 refugees was holding around 15,000. And it was like a concentration camp. And from inside that camp, there was child trafficking, drug trafficking. It was hideous. It was hideous. People should be ashamed of themselves. Even more recently, with the Greek wildfires, there have been stories in Greece of refugees crossing from Turkey into the Greek mainland and basically being threatened with being burned alive by the kind of the mafia elements on the Greek mainland. Many of them did lose their lives in the fires because, of course, they were terrified to reach out to the authorities. And so they were wandering lost in the forest and they were burned alive. So, Europe does not have a great record as regards its treatment of refugees. And yet when I went to these centers in Eastern Russia, some of them, they only had 24 hours notice to get the area prepared for incoming hundreds of refugees from the Donbass region, as Kiev sort of upped its campaign to ethnically cleanse the area prior to the referendum in 2022. One was it was a kids' summer and winter camp. So it was beautiful. It was in this forest area and all these little wooden log cabins with heating, electricity, running water. And so every family had its own little house in the woods. It was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And the kids, when they were arrived, even the adults, of course, were given counseling as soon as they arrived, and they had ongoing psychological trauma care. The kids had multiple kind of therapy rooms, occupational therapy. There was a massive playground on site. They had huge rooms dedicated to kids with books and toys. I think one of the photos I shows a kid in one of the rooms. They were given 3 meals a day. We joined them for one of the meals, and I have to say it was delicious. They had a huge amount of space and privacy. They had a pharmacy on site that was established on site. They had doctors on site. The other center, I think, was a former, like a mental health hospital. And so it was a hospital. It had less of a kind of friendly feel about it. But still, each family had their own room, their own facilities, their own bathroom, etc. Again, the privacy was very respected. And the kids were all with their families, counter to what these UN agency reports are claiming, that they're being separated from their families. While the reality, of course, is that Ukraine, even before 2014, was known in Europe to be the hub of child trafficking, prostitution, drug trafficking, pedophilia. And that is ongoing. There are multiple reports, even now, of children being sold for their organs, of continuous child abduction, child trafficking from inside the Donbass territories.
Baby farms. So, there's baby farms going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not as if the West also doesn't have a record of this, you know?
Yes.
In Vietnam, Operation Baby Lift, Bernard Kouchner, the head of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, until 1989, was responsible for placing a known pedophile. He took him out of prison and put him in charge of an orphanage in Romania. And when he was kicked out by the locals, who realized what was going on, that he was still committing pedophile acts against these children under his care in the orphanage, Kouchner paid for him to be got out of Romania before he was prosecuted. Chad, Kouchner, I can't remember the name of the operation, it was under Sarkozy's presidency, but kids were brought to Paris from Chad, supposedly under this kind of legitimate operation, but the reality was it was inter-country adoption, which is legalized trafficking. So, you know, the West has the most blemished record of any part of this globe that we live in, through decades of colonialism, imperialism, savagery, and genocide of the countries that they target. In Africa, how many vaccines have been dumped in Africa? How many medicines have been tried out? You know, Africans for decades have been used basically as you know, laboratory specimens for the testing of these drugs or for the dumping of drugs. And you know, and here we are pointing the finger at Russia for actually enabling the escape of these children to safety from a war zone that the West has created and is maintaining and sustaining without any regard for the children in Donbass that on a daily basis are losing relatives, losing limbs, losing lives. I mean,
their lives have been like completely upended. Like the idea that we, again, it's so frustrating to me to watch people fall for this. This idea that we care about humanitarian rights and democracy, and that's why we're there, and we got to save the people of Ukraine. We're using the people of Ukraine. We don't care about the people of Ukraine. The United States doesn't even care about our own people, and I'm supposed to pretend that I believe that we care about the people of Ukraine. Of course we don't. If we cared about the people of Ukraine, we wouldn't have overthrown their democratically elected government in 2014 and installed a puppet dictator so that we could, you know, use them as we are right now as cannon fodder. It's disgusting. And so, yes, this hypocrisy that we think, again, as I said, when we, you know, are trying to wag our finger at Vladimir Putin about his war crimes, which, listen, I have no doubt that there have been war crimes committed. There always are in war. War is a war crime. So I have no doubt. But the idea that the United States thinks that we have the moral superiority or the moral authority to wag our finger at literally anybody, the entirety of what Vladimir Putin has done in Ukraine since this whole thing started is like a Tuesday to the United States. I'm not impressed. Like clean your own house first. It's so disgusting to me. And it's very frustrating that the propaganda game is so effective in the West that there are still people that buy this garbage. It is absolute garbage. And it's, again, clean your own house first. I mean, there is no greater evil, in my opinion, than the West, than NATO, than the United States. We are committing carnage the globe over, and we want to wag our finger at Vladimir Putin. It's just ridiculous. Okay, we have to take a quick break and get some headlines. Hang tight. We're going to be right back. TNT Radio.
We have some wonderful news for you.
TNT Radio News.
This is James O'Neill with a check of today's headlines. Dr. Anthony Fauci is facing criticism, being labeled a fraud and a liar, subsequent to acknowledging that there is currently insufficient evidence to support the idea that wearing masks effectively curtailed the spread of COVID. According to a new report by Energy UK in collaboration with Oxford Economics, it suggested that the UK must enhance its investment by 66% in order to attain net zero by 2050.
On air and on the app.
I listen on the app.
Stay up to date around the clock.
I listen, therefore I know.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we are here joined by Vanessa Beeley. We were just talking about the situation with the kids in Ukraine and in Syria and the Western hypocrisy. But I would like to shift gears because there's a lot happening in Syria right now. And this is something that's getting largely overlooked. Obviously, I think most people are focused on Ukraine. You know, some people are focused on BRICS and Africa and all of that stuff. And I feel like the conversation around Syria has very much taken a back burner in recent years. And in fact, some believe that the whole regime change effort in Syria is over. It's not over. It never ended. They're very much still actively trying to overthrow Assad. I think that has never stopped. And so I know that there's been a lot happening in Syria. So what can you tell us about the latest there?
Okay, so if I kind of, what I'm tending to do, because there's hot areas in basically every area that isn't under the control of the Syrian government and Syrian forces and allies. So in the northwest, we've had an increase in activity from basically Al-Qaeda under various rebrandings. Now, of course, they're known as HTS, but still headed up by Abu Muhammad al-Julani, that has a 10 million bounty on his head put there by the United States, and yet he's been interviewed by Martin Smith of PBS to try and present him as the legitimate opposition to the Syrian government, the internationally recognized Syrian government in Damascus. And basically those armed groups that are now pretty much all under the control, well, not all, there are factions, there are competing factions in the northwest and Idlib, have been carrying out attacks on the kind of the Syrian Arab Army axis to the west of Aleppo, to the north of Aleppo, and close to Latakia on the coast. That has been pretty much ongoing for the last few months, and it is increasing. Russia has been increasing its targeting of the terrorist positions, their headquarters, their drone factories, their ammunition, storehouses, etc., in Idlib, in preparation perhaps for a bigger Syrian military push to regain the territory the other side of the main arterial roads in that region that at the moment are sort of in a bit of a no man's land. So that's the northwest. In the north, of course, Turkey continues to annex territory there and to build an apartheid wall, very similar to the apartheid wall in the occupied territories of Palestine put there by the Zionist entity. And there have been recent attacks by the Turkish proxies against Syrian Arab Army positions, which have been dealt with very harshly by Russia and Syrian artillery. Then in the northeast, this is a kind of interesting area at the moment, and it's a hot area at the moment. I mean, this is the area that the US has occupied since, I guess, around 2017, with up to 3,000 military personnel, contractors, and private security firms. And of course, they are stealing 80% of Syrian resources, the oil in particular, and their agricultural resources, both directly and through their Kurdish separatist proxies. What's happening right now is that there is an ongoing battle between the Arab tribal factions in the northeast and the Kurdish Contras. Now, what this means for Syria, although the tribal factions are not necessarily overly sympathetic to Damascus, they are preferable to the Kurdish factions, because the Kurdish factions are totally under the control of the US, UK, Israeli alliance. And as I've said, they are ethnically cleansing this area on behalf of the US. Victoria Nuland of Cookie fame in 2014 in Ukraine has been talking for some time about creating an autonomous region. In other words, partitioning Syria and using the Kurdish Contras as a settlement proxy in that area, and of course maintaining control of Syrian resources, which means that Syrians don't have electricity, water, etc., etc. In the southeast, we have the largest US illegal military base at Al Tanif, which is on the border with Jordan and Iraq. And below that you have, which is now back in the kind of media narratives, the Rukban alleged refugee camp, which is in reality a prison camp for Syrian civilians and a recruitment center for terrorists aligned with the US agenda in Syria to topple the Syrian government and to carve Syria up into sectarian statelets. What has been happening recently is that the US has moved 7,500 terrorists from the north, from the Turkish occupied territories down to Al Tanf to multiply the forces that they have there already, because they're already training ISIS and various Free Syrian Army derivative groups in the 55-kilometer exclusion zone around Al Tanf. The 7,500 are intended to be sent to the Jordan border to basically close it off to Syrians and to have control of the border crossings, as they have done in the northwest between Syria and Turkey. But they've also been training an estimated 16,000 Druze militia. Now, the Druze is a monotheistic, Abrahamic community, ethnic religion down in the the southeast of Syria. They also are in Lebanon and in Israel. And there is a small minority of the Druze that at the moment is being weaponized to develop a movement for separatism in the south. Now, that movement is backed directly by Israel, because of course Israel perceives it as an opportunity to gain more territory inside southern Syria. And of course you have Netanyahu still in power in the occupied territories of Palestine, who is an expansionist Zionist, which means that they perceive that territory inside Jordan and inside Syria is for them, basically. So this is all part of the kind of, the Yinon plan, etc., of Greater Israel. So at the moment, there is a risk, which to some degree is being played down inside Syria itself. But to me, it is quite a worry, because if Syria is to lose territory through occupation in the south, that enables Israel and its proxies and the US and its proxies to approach closer to Damascus, which means the artillery that they have available to them, provided by the US, of course, and whatever might enter Syria through Jordan. Again, of course, Jordan was instrumental in allowing weapons and terrorists to enter Syria in 2011. So it will bring the hostile forces and the hostile occupation closer to Damascus itself, yeah. which is a worry. It's also a worry for the majority of the Druze community that are pro the Syrian state and are pro territorial integrity of Syria, because of course they will be marooned in an area that is infested again with terrorist groups under the control of the US and Israel. So yeah. it is a dangerous tipping point for Syria right now.
Yeah, it feels like it's, again, I don't think that the regime change efforts have ever stopped, but I feel like there's been, over the last little bit, this sort of an escalation, or at least, it feels as if some efforts are being ramped up on the part of the West. And of course, with Israel's aid, I think that, you can't forget Israel. Israel's always involved in this. And I want to kind of talk about that. We have to take a quick break, but hang tight. We're going to be right back right after this here on TNT Radio.
With his expert analysis and opinion, this is TNT Radio's Timothy Shea.
Donna Brazile is as experienced a Democrat hand as there is out there. She was campaign manager for Al Gore in 2000. She's twice served as acting head of the Democrat National Committee, and she will tell whatever lie happens to benefit the Democrats most at any particular point, like when she told ABC's George Stephanopoulos today that Biden's policies are helping Americans and making American lives better. But Donna's no fool. Later in the program, she said that she's seen three political movements in her lifetime: Ronald Reagan's, Barack Obama's, and Donald Trump's. And she said she's never seen anything like the Trump America First movement. And that's because it's about we the people. It's us turning the tables on them. Donna also astutely pointed out to The Hill this week that Democrats have lost their hold on Black and Hispanic voters, and that getting them back into the fold should be the number one priority for the Democrat Party. Donna, I hate to break it to you, but once you lose Black, they never go back. Good luck getting them to unsee what they've already seen. From MAGAInstitute.com, this is Timothy Shea for TNT Radio.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
This is the Misty Winston Show on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we're back with guest Vanessa Beeley. We're talking about the situation currently in Syria. Again, as I said, I feel like this has been very much put on the back burner really, it's been for a while. I think that, Trump tried to pretend as if this was all over, it's done. And as I said, these regime change efforts have never stopped. They've been continuing very much kind of on the back burner in silence. But you were just talking there, and you laid out basically the entirety of the country of Syria in the different regions and how each are kind of facing their own issues, their own threats. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because it feels as if this is very kind of multifaceted. It's kind of convoluted. There's different threats in different regions. Do you think that is intentional, that is intentional by design in an effort to kind of weaken Syria in a way of kind of dividing it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to someone here the other day, and I pointed out that when I look at the map of Syria right now, I see the map of Palestine before. Yes. Because what you're actually seeing is territory gradually being eaten up by hostile occupying states, right? Yes. Not only Israel, but the US, Turkey, and their various proxies, whether it's Muslim Brotherhood, Qatari-backed, with Turkey, whether it's Jolani, Al-Qaeda in Idlib, and of course, they've been described by Jake Sullivan and by Ambassador Jeffries as being a U.S. asset or on the side of the U.S. in Syria. Newland talking about the autonomous region under the control of the Kurdish factions in the northeast, and so on. And so it goes on. So if you go around the clock face of Syria's borders, 3/4 of those borders are under hostile occupation. And of course, what the US wants to do is to close the Al-Bukamal border in the northeast, which is the only border that enables humanitarian relief, for example, to be brought in from Iran through Iraq and into Syria. And that has been bombed multiple times, both under the Biden administration, under the Trump administration, under the Obama administration. This is a bipartisan war. And I actually wanted to make the point that 3 Republican congressmen entered northern Syria illegally. French Hill, Scott Fitzgerald, and Ben Klein last Sunday. Now, they entered through the Bab al-Salame crossing with Turkey. That crossing is actually under the control of the Hamza Brigade and the Suleiman Shah Brigade, both of which have just been sanctioned by the Biden administration for human rights abuses. So it's okay for Republican congressmen to enter an area which is under the control of sanctioned terrorists in the US and not have any recrimination for it whatsoever. Meet with the white helmets that are a CIA, MI6 incubated organization, an auxiliary of Al-Qaeda inside Syria, and exit fine. No problem. They weren't injured. They weren't kidnapped for ransom. And of course, what are they talking about? They're talking about regime change. They're talking about Syria needing U.S. governance, U.S. leadership. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Yes.
And it's nothing to do with Trump. It's nothing to do with Biden. This is a bipartisan, deep state project in Syria to take control of Syria, break it up, balkanize it, steal its resources, and take control of it and kick Russia out. That's the most important thing. Get Russia out of the Middle East, because of course it has the military base on the coastal region of Syria. So I very much see that the entire project is being coordinated. In the northeast, the tribal factions uprising against the Kurdish factions doesn't actually play into the US playbook. It doesn't compute with the US. It's actually a loss if the tribal factions take over the territory in the northeast, because they won't be as easily controlled by the US, and they're more likely to negotiate and do deals with Damascus that the US has always prevented the Kurdish factions from doing in the northeast, because they effectively want to carve it out of the Syrian territory and have it under their control and have control of the resources so that they can keep the Syrian people in a state of abject misery and poverty, which is what they've been doing for years through the various sanctions. And of course, French Hill, the Republican congressman who led the three into Syria, basically, he was very much responsible for the anti-normalization bill that passed through Congress to punish any countries that normalized relations with Syria and with President Assad, and that includes former, U.S. allies, basically Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, UAE, and also again, while the West was harvesting opium in Afghanistan, here they are claiming that President Assad is turning Syria into a narco state and is producing Captagon. His entire family is producing Captagon in Syria. It has nothing to do with the terrorist groups that have established drug manufacturing camps all over Syria, in the areas that they occupied, and were supplying it to mental health patients to enable them to carry out suicide bombings on behalf of these extremist factions. That had nothing to do with the US whatsoever. Now it's all President Assad, and it's another excuse for even more sanctions to be imposed on Syria. So it's French Hill, the Republican congressman, that is effectively pushing through both of these bills in Congress and increasing the economic hybrid war pressure on the Syrian people, because these sanctions not only don't have a UN mandate, but of course they're unilateral. They always claim they aren't. They always claim that sanctions only target individuals, which is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
They target the people of the country that they are trying to destroy, basically.
Yeah, that's the intention, because they're hoping that by creating such desperate conditions that the people will then rise up against their government, that kind of a thing. This is not new. This is the same playbook that we've used everywhere. And just so everybody knows, the three Republicans that Vanessa's talking about, she has a great article up on her Substack. Again, it's beeley.substack.com. And it goes through all of the details of their visit there, what they were there to speak about, all of that good stuff. And it's just amazing to me, as you mentioned, once again, the Western hypocrisy of us, claiming that Assad is creating this narco state. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody more Machiavellian and ridiculous than the United States of America. We are constantly projecting what we do on our enemies. It's amazing to witness, right? It's crazy that we're so good at it, though. It's so honestly, we're so good. Credit where it's due. We're very good at that game. It's crazy.
And then, you've got Israel basically bombing in tandem with whatever terrorist activity is ongoing. So when, for example, Russia and the Syrian army were pounding the Al-Qaeda headquarters and positions in Idlib, what did Israel do? Of course, it bombs Aleppo Airport, International Airport, which is predominantly a civilian airport anyway. Damascus International Airport, civilian and residential areas in Damascus, because Israel has done that throughout the nearly 13 years of this war. Whenever there have been Syrian Arab Army advances, Syria bombs runways, it bombs air defense units. And of course, there was a report put out by a Tel Aviv university in Hebrew, but we picked up on it. And actually, I did an interview with the great Kivot Galmasian about it, because it was kind of fascinating. And so basically what it was saying is that Israel is pretty worried about how Iran and Syria, inside Syria, have been developing not only defense capability, but also offense capability. And they're desperately probing, trying to find one where the S-300s are, the Russian S-300s that Syria hasn't used yet in anger, because it doesn't want to reveal the location, one. because then there is potential for them to be damaged or destroyed until there is a major escalation or confrontation with Israel, which is potentially coming. And of course, many of these weapon development sites are underground, deep underground. So Israel is getting increasingly frustrated that it can't do any damage to these development centers by long-range missiles or by firing missiles from the air, but from the Mediterranean, for example. It can't basically get into Syrian airspace to get close enough to actually do any damage to these facilities. So, Israel is effectively trying to prepare for the time that it thinks Syria is going to have kind of completed the war against Western-sponsored terrorism inside Syria, and it will then turn its attention to Israel and the occupied Golan territories, which, by the way, provide the Zionist entity with 30% of its water supply. So again, resources are being taken from Syria illegally through the annexation of that territory, not only oil.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you brought up that when you're looking at Syria and you see Palestine, because that's exactly what I was talking about. That's exactly the playbook that I feel like it's being used. And it's very frustrating to watch. But also, you just described that Israel is bombing, airports, civilian neighborhoods, things like that. I've been told that they only bomb military targets, Vanessa.
Oh no, and they only bomb Iranian military targets, not. And of course, the other thing that has been going on, again, in collaboration with Israel and the United States, is the triggering of ISIS, which is nothing more than another US proxy inside Syria, to carry out attacks against civilians and against Syrian Arab Army positions and convoys. There was more than 25 Syrian army soldiers killed east of Deir ez-Zor when ISIS attacked the bus that was taking them, I think, back to their military base. And many more were injured in that attack. So, I'm sorry, one of the dogs has just started snoring. If you
No,
can
that's
hear
okay.
it.
It's late, Vanessa. It's almost 2:00 in the morning there. Give the dog a break. No, but you're absolutely right. And I think that's what I'm concerned about, because it feels as they're using this, the Palestine playbook for Syria, it also feels as if they're using a little bit of the Ukraine strategy here. They want to weaken Russia. They're using Syria to do it. And it feels very, obviously it's a very manipulated scenario. All of this stuff is very planned out. But it feels like it's really heating up, and that troubles me, because I feel like there's a lot of boiling points right now, and it feels as if all of this stuff is eventually going to boil over, and that's I don't know. It's not looking good, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think the problem to some degree is that the US is losing its grip. The US alliance is losing its grip. The Five Eyes are losing their sight of the holy grail of power,
Well, that's what I say all the time. I feel like the United States right now is a wounded animal backed into a corner. And the problem with that is we're a wounded animal backed into a corner, but we are heavily armed. And that is really dangerous. You know what I mean? Like as we become more desperate, I feel like we're going to become more irrational. And it's very likely that a lot of really bad things could happen in that desperate grasp to continue to hold power. And so that's what I'm worried about. As we're seeing all of these things kick off, not only is the United States poking at Russia, we're poking at China. We've got a situation in Iran. We've got a situation in Syria. It feels as if everything's coming to a head. And that's, it's kind of terrifying. The idea that, because I feel like we've seen empires, crumble and fall before, but I don't think we've ever seen as large as the United States fall, and certainly not one as heavily armed. And that's really what is going to be really dangerous for all of us. The entirety of planet Earth, that is dangerous for all of us. Okay, so unfortunately, we're almost out of time. Well, actually, fortunately for you, because now you can go to bed. But can you tell everybody where they can find you, where they can follow you, all that good stuff? Hit everybody with the links.
Do you want me just to mention where people can find my work?
All that stuff.
Okay. They can. The main one at the moment is Substack, and Patreon, Telegram. I am still on Twitter, but I'm totally disenchanted with it. It's a nightmare. and most of us are shadow banned. So Substack and Telegram really are the two main ones.
Yes. And all of the stuff that we talked about today, Vanessa has done work on very recently. You can go to her Substack. Again, it's beeley.substack.com. There's the article there about the 3 Republicans who were just in Syria illegally. There's all of the stuff about the kids that are being sacrificed, essentially. It's what it feels like. All that good stuff. She does fantastic work, and definitely check out her Telegram. She is very active there. As I said, she's on Twitter, but Twitter is a nightmare right now. You know, free speech Elon is not really free speech Elon. So definitely go check her out on Telegram, and for sure support on Patreon if you can. Please support independent media. We need it now more than ever. I think it's very apparent that mainstream media has failed all of us, and we need truth tellers who are on the ground. And that's exactly what Vanessa does. So thank you so much for staying up late. I appreciate you as always. I love you, and stay safe. Okay, I'll be back tomorrow with another show for you guys. Definitely tune in 6 p.m. Eastern. As Julian Assange says, learn, challenge, act now, and don't go anywhere. Timothy Shea right after this on TNT Radio.